we've been treating volunteering like taking a supplement after eating at McDonald's. And that we actually, by doing that, made it okay to eat at McDonald's. I'm getting paid a lot less and I'm still not fulfilled. When it comes to fulfillment, there's only three things that really matter: relationships, impact, and growth. We need to feel like we have meaningful relationships. We need to feel like we're making a meaningful impact. We need to always feel like we're growing.
Welcome to the Spirituality in Leadership podcast. I'm Andrew Cohn. Spirituality in Leadership is a platform for conversations with leaders at all levels about bringing our spiritual dimensions to our leadership, our teams, our workplaces, and all areas of our lives in order to achieve greater success and fulfillment and build and sustain healthier organizations. If you'd like to connect with me to talk further about these topics and or about individual or team coaching, leadership workshops, or team alignment, please go to my website, lighthouseteams.com. Enjoy the podcast. Welcome back to the Spirituality in Leadership podcast. I'm Andrew Cohn. This is a wonderful conversation. I'm so glad you're tuning in for this with my colleague and fellow traveler and new friend, Aaron Hurst. Aaron is the author of the best-selling book that came out in 2014 called The Purpose Economy. We've talked in this podcast at various times with different guests who raised the notion of purpose and individual purpose, also shared purpose from a leadership point of view, as that connects to motivation, as it connects to engagement, as it connects to fulfillment at work, actually, and outside of work. But for purposes of this podcast, we tend to focus more on the workplace and leadership in the workplace. And a lot of people talk about purpose based on their beliefs, their assumptions, their experience, discovering their own purpose and supporting others in discovering theirs. Aaron does that, but he's also a researcher who speaks of purpose from a scholarly point of view, in addition to being a societal change agent as he is. He's an award-winning social entrepreneur, and he's all about driving positive societal change. He's just a wonderful, accomplished, interesting, very, very interesting guy, and I hope you enjoy this conversation. He talks a bit about his personal story, from how his grandfather was one of the first people into Hitler's bunker at the end of World War II, and the impact that had on his grandfather, and how that contributed to creating a memo to the President of the United States that was part of the foundation of the Peace Corps, and then later the Aspen Institute. He talked about his own experience training in the prison system, in the inner city education system, and then in Silicon Valley as a developer and program manager. He talks about his experience starting the Taproot Foundation back in 2001, which was focused on getting top talent for nonprofits. And ultimately that led to leading the largest nonprofit consulting service in the world. So our conversation talked about many things, including the definition of purpose. Aaron talked about it as the North Star. It provides clarity about how we best show up in the world. And it can mean a lot of other different things to different people. So a more specific definition may or may not be useful, other than it really is our North Star. He talks about the 4 myths of purpose, what gets in the way of a healthy and clear application of purpose, and also talks about the importance of being clear about our purpose, because if we know what fulfills us, we have more likelihood of getting it. Just like with any other kind of a goal or any other sort of direction or area of fulfillment, to be able to name it and identify it and clarify what it is increases our chances of reaching it. He talks about how there is a diversity of purpose really on any team and any group of people. So if we're talking about a team in the workplace, it's necessary to recognize that people are motivated by different things with respect to their individual purposes. And it's necessary to reward and celebrate impact at these different levels of motivation. So from a leadership point of view, how can we recognize the different types of purpose and reward and celebrate impact at those different levels? He led an organization that developed an online purpose assessment, so to help people clarify what their individual purpose is. And hundreds of thousands of people have taken that assessment. There's a version of that in his book, The Purpose Economy. And then if you want to access that online, you can go to imperative.com. He talks about the three things that matter with regard to fulfillment at work: relationships, impact, and growth. And you'll hear the descriptions of each in our conversation. And the important distinction between a purpose mindset and a transactional mindset in the workplace. In fact, he coined the term a purpose mindset, and talking about how we can lead and drive effectiveness and fulfillment in our workplaces by leveraging a purpose mindset and what that means. He talks a little bit about what leaders can do to promote more of a purpose mindset in their workplaces, and a lot more. So that is my introduction. I hope you enjoy the conversation as much as I did, and thanks for listening. Welcome back to the Spirituality in Leadership podcast. I'm Andrew Cohn, and here today with my relatively new friend and fascinating individual and author, Aaron Hurst, author of The Purpose Economy and much more. And I'm really excited to have you with us today, Aaron. Welcome to the podcast.
Yeah, it's great to be here. And we haven't known each other for a long time, but I feel like we've got a lot in common, starting and ending with the Yankees, which is the most important thing. So
starting and ending with the Yankees. Yeah. So start spreading the news. We're here to talk. Beautiful. And you are joining us today from your office in Northern California.
I'm actually in Seattle today. So yes, similar. It is kind of like Northern California, so you're not that far off.
When I lived in LA years ago, there were bumper stickers that said, "Welcome to California, now go home." And my sense is that there's similar things in Seattle now.
Yes, there's someone just told me the other day, like the unofficial tagline is "Leave me alone." It's kind of the Seattle cultural vibe, which I'm trying to figure out how to change. So hopefully in a couple of years, it won't be that anymore.
Well, I appreciate that commitment, and perhaps a place to start. I've talked a bit with you about the thesis of this podcast, and shared some of my sort of assumptions and operating principles. And you come from a bit of a different place, a really interesting background. So I'd love if you'd share a little bit about your personal story and how you came to be talking about these topics of purpose, particularly purpose in the workplace.
Yeah, no, happy to. Yeah, I mean, the story I usually share starts with my grandfather, who was a naval officer in World War II and one of the first officers in Hitler's bunk at the end of the war. And he would often he'd stolen a piece of Hitler's stationery from his desk that he kept in the closet as sort of a memento, because it was so weird, but it brought you back to like picturing that moment. And coming out of World War II, he really made it his goal to figure out like what role he could play in preventing World War III, just seeing the incredible pain that was caused by World War. And his key insight was that it's about shared purpose, that when we actually get to know each other and have a shared purpose, we tend to find ways to collaborate, find ways to work together. And when we don't, we tend to fill the void with assumptions and hatred. And that traditional tourism, for example, doesn't really build understanding between countries, that we actually need to find ways to create shared purpose. So he went on and wrote a memo for President Kennedy when he was in the State Department, basically articulating the need for the Peace Corps and how it should be developed, which was instrumental in getting that off the ground, and then ran the Aspen Institute for roughly its first 25 years, which both of those organizations were fundamentally about shared purpose, getting people together from different backgrounds, but who have a shared for human goal towards making a community, a person, the world a better place. So I really grew up with that as sort of a legacy. And frankly, a lot of my work around purpose has been trying to really understand what is my contribution. Having those huge shoes, like size 35 shoes to fill, it's like, how can my little size 2 shoes, like what can I do to make a difference? How can I make an impact? And it's been a journey. I think often those who study something are the ones that struggle with it. It's not the ones where it's intuitive. I remember going back to the Yankees, I remember there was a piece about hitting coaches and how people like Don Mattingly are terrible hitting coaches because they just bat intuitively. You need to find the person who struggled with hitting to be the best hitting coach, because they can actually help someone through that process.
They can articulate the steps that they take. They can
empathize. Yeah, because they actually had to intentionally go about it versus the person for whom it was just intuitive, if you will. So Andrew, I started my first business when I was 16. which was really fun and sort of got that entrepreneurial bug. I created a program when I was at Michigan as a student, teaching in the prisons, which was a really powerful experience for me to take students out to prisons to teach creative writing and then tie that back to interdisciplinary curriculum that they got Michigan university credit for. Went and worked in inner city ed in Chicago for about 6 months, and the combination of Midwest winter and just seeing how big the challenge was and that the current approaches didn't seem to be making it work. Moved to my family's home in Palo Alto and started working in Silicon Valley and did that for 5 years in early stage startups. Coming in as a self-taught developer over the weekend, and then as a product manager, and these sort of early stage pre-10 people startups that each scaled to about 200 people before imploding, just based on economic trends. But that was really, to me, like, was learning about how to scale work. How do we start to think about scale? And at that point, just realized I wanted to go back and figure out how to help social impact issues, and started the Taproot Foundation back in 2001, right after 9/11. And the real inspiration there was just, I saw how startups had access to talent that helped them lay the track before they needed the track. Whereas with nonprofits, they rarely got that talent. If they did, it was way after they needed it. So they're always sort of playing catch up, and realized that if we could get business talent to do pro bono work the way lawyers do, that we could actually shift that resource equation. And that was an incredible journey, Andrew. We opened up 7 offices across the US, became the largest nonprofit consulting firm in the world, and then sort of had this aha moment that no matter how big we got, we would never be big enough to meet the need, and switched strategies and got into really figuring out how to build a marketplace, and working with the White House, working with business schools, working with corporations, really looking at how to build pro bono into the ethic of business the way it is in the legal profession. And ultimately partnered with BMW, brought that to 30 countries around the world. And what I saw there, which leads into the purpose at work piece, was that when I asked people why they were doing pro bono work on top of their 50 hours a week and kids and everything else in their lives, what I heard most often is, I find pro bono work so much more fulfilling than my job. And it's interesting. I did a project with LinkedIn where we got them to add a field for, like, I'm interested in doing pro bono work. Another one, I'm interested in doing board service. And overwhelmingly, people were like, yes, I want to do it. And nonprofits were just like, like they didn't engage. They're like, so much of this, we need the resources, but we're not the place for corporate folks to get their needs met for fulfillment. Like, their employers need to do that. And it really was an aha moment to me of, like, we've been treating volunteering like taking a supplement after eating at McDonald's. And that we actually, by doing that, made it okay to eat at McDonald's. And what we need to do instead was figure out how to serve healthy food at work. And that's really where I transitioned into writing The Purpose Economy, starting Imperative, to really look at this question around, like, how could we change work itself to focus on meaning and the emerging science around meaning. So could talk forever about all this stuff, but that's sort of a intro into my journey up until about 2 years ago.
Well, there's a lot to talk about in there. And maybe one thing I'd like to ask, because I'm fascinated by this connection with your grandfather, and I just feel this beautiful sense of continuity and honoring your grandfather and his work and his direction, if you will. Do you think that he would define purpose the way you do, especially after you've done all the research and written the book and done all these different things, or would it be different? And does it change over time?
I don't know what his take on it would be. I mean, I think people decide what they want that word to mean and to fit the narrative that they want. I think he probably would have a slightly different definition of it, but I think, seeing the research now, I think he was always someone who was constantly shifting his thinking, based on research and based on what he experienced. In terms of it changing over time, there's 2 different parts to that. Like, does it change during our lifetimes as based on our own personal development? And then there's, like, historically, has it shifted in terms of thinking? I think in terms of the historical part, I think it's tied into every faith that have been around forever. It's tied into, like, every culture that's been around forever. Again, American pop culture, purpose has come first to be like a Christian piece with, like, Rick Warren's Purpose Driven Life, and this sort of whole narrative around sort of purpose as a revelation and as sort of this tie to religion.
Higher purpose.
Yes,
Yes.
exactly. And then Hollywood, I think, has treated it as if it's a superhero who has figured out, like, what the problem in the world is they need to fix. and telling these romanticized stories that are, I think, very misleading and harmful to our culture and our understanding around purpose, much like, the criticism of rom-coms and other, the way romance is portrayed in the media, aren't super helpful. So I think it's shifted there. In terms of human development, what we found in our research was that, contrary to like what pop culture says, people tend to find a lot more purpose and meaning as they get older, not when they're younger. And that actually it's at about age 55 that you see a huge bump in purpose, but it's pretty stable up until that point. So I think what we've seen is newer generations that are much more conscious of problems in the world and a desire to make a difference in them, or at least to portray themselves as making a difference in them. But psychologically, they're actually, aren't any more purposeful than previous generations.
Yeah, I hear that. I hear a lot. I mean, part of my work is I coach MBA students at Wharton. I love working with that generation. They're young, but they're not that young. Much more about meaning, making a contribution, which may or may not be the same as purpose. It's more, there's something I want to help solve for. There's a goal I'd like to accomplish, a social goal, a universal societal goal, something to improve, which I think is a little bit different definition than purpose, but we don't need to exactly wordsmith.
The cousins. Yeah.
They are cousins. Yeah, absolutely. Good. Interesting. And just as a little plug, you and I met in a retreat with the Modern Elder Academy,
Yep.
which I think is all about helping people of a certain age, which is broadly defined. Uh,
Yep.
Personally, I think too broadly, but that's just my subjective opinion. Helping people of a certain age who are coming to that point of what is the contribution I really want to make. Um, I think over the years, a lot has been written, particularly by older people who have been successful in business, writing about, oh, it's not just about making money.
Yeah.
Which, of course, the complaint is always it's easy for you to say you've made your money.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, but still, I believe it is a natural part of maturity to get to a certain age. And I'm not a social scientist, but just subjectively, it's a part of maturity to say, well, I've done all this. What do I really want to do?
Well, I think it's also that old cliche, wherever you go, there you are.
Yes.
Like, I think when you're young, you don't realize. And after you've been to a lot of places and you realize you're still the same person, you gain that wisdom, right?
Right, that's right. And maybe you know that because you realize you're having the same marriage the second time around or the same conflicts at work or whatever it might be. Absolutely. So good plug to get John Kabat-Zinn's book in here like that as well. So well played. Well played. And so we talked a little, and by the way, so I think I heard you say that you don't necessarily work to define purpose. Did I hear you say that? Because if you did that what that triggers for me is I'm reluctant to define what spirituality means for purposes of spirituality and leadership. It means a lot of different things to different people. And I think that a narrow definition can often be alienating and unnecessary. But for you with purpose, is that something that's easy for you to define, or do you find it can be very subjective and better left alone that way?
I guess the two pieces to that is like the definition of the word purpose, and then there's the definition of Andrew's purpose.
Got it.
I feel like the one around the definition of the word purpose, I think is, it ends up just leading into semantic conversation, which I don't think is the purpose of purpose. So it just sort of creates this like spin cycle, and you start doing semantics. Purpose to me at a high level is sort of North Star. It's clarity around how you best show up in the world, and I don't tie it down to a specific definition. I try to avoid the at the individual level. What I found was that we did this study, and we will actually use psychology to do an assessment to predict the purpose of every employee in a company. And have deployed that everywhere from like Disney, PwC, Microsoft, like, several hundred companies to help individual employees really uncover sort of what their purpose is. But it's tied to psychology, because what we found was that if you work with executive coaches and they do purpose statements with their folks, they generate beautiful poetry. But if you actually peel back what's going on under the poetry, that there's patterns behind that based on people's psychological profile that are predictable to a large degree. And we were able to decode that and be able to help people really understand, what their purpose is and how to start to make it accessible to people to play with.
Mm. And from the lens that I tend to see through and
Yep.
focus on, how does that information help leadership and help an organization invite people to be more engaged, to be more committed in their work, to give them a place where that purpose can be expressed? Because presumably, okay, now we have this information. What do we do with it? How does it benefit the individual and our collective workplace?
Well, I think that ties, Andrew, to like the myths of purpose, because I think those are the
Oh,
things
great.
that get in the way of that question. And unless people have thought through those and unlearned certain things, they get caught up back in that in that logic. So I think I'll share a couple of those with you that I think help
Please.
you. I think the first one, which is the most important one, is that purpose is not a cause. I saw this all the time working at, leading Taproot, where you'd have, you know, business professionals being like, "Oh, I'm just not fulfilled because I haven't found my cause." And they'd quit their job and go work, at a nonprofit, and they'd be like, "Oh, I'm getting paid a lot less and I'm still not fulfilled." Um, and we saw in the data, people in the nonprofit sector, healthcare, education, majority unfulfilled. And you saw people like in accounting who barely saw sunlight who are fulfilled. And you're like, you can't tie this to the cause. Like that's really problematic. And that's what most people are looking for. They say, I'm looking for my purpose. They want to know that like one-legged kittens are like the thing that they're meant to work on. And they see Hollywood talk about that. They see people who go into things like medicine. It appears as if they've known all their lives that this is the thing that they're meant to do. And that's just super problematic. And the main reason for that, or one of the main reasons, there's two actually that I like to focus on. One is that it's putting external ownership over it versus internal. You're waiting for the cause to reveal itself versus trying to figure out what actually is meaningful to you. The second one is, I know, Andrew, you and I have talked about like growth and fixed mindset. When you actually look at purpose, when people think about a calling, which is this idea of finding your cause, a calling or a cause is really a fixed mindset towards purpose. It's getting locked in on a singular definition. And what happens is if that is no longer available to you, then you've lost your purpose and your identity. And that's what you see a lot with retirement, where people are like, oh my God, like I have no identity. It's because they treated purpose as a calling or a cause. So it's really important to let go of that definition. So that's the first myth.
And if I could, before you go to the second, I'm sorry to cut you off.
No, not at
is,
all.
if it's not a cause, what is it? And maybe this needs to be part two of a conversation. But if it's
Let's build to that. I think it's a great question. The natural next question. A couple other things though, just as myths around it, 'cause I think it helps to dimensionalize that. I think similarly, like purpose is not a revelation. So generally people don't just suddenly have their purpose revealed to them. I think Hollywood, again, loves to tell this story. We like to think we climb to the top of a mountain and get our tablets that give us our purpose and we know exactly what to do. And we hear stories about someone reading an article or something happening in their lives, and all of a sudden, like their purpose was revealed to them. And again, that's just sort of sitting around passively waiting for someone else to answer the question for us. Whereas what we found was that it's something that continuously reveals itself to you when you're open to it and are trying to learn about yourself as you show up in the world. That's sort of that second myth. Third is, you sort of touched on this a little bit earlier, but is that purpose is a luxury. A lot of people think, especially because of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, that until you have money, you can't worry about purpose. And my hypothesis there is that Maslow's hierarchy of needs is based on a scarcity mindset. And that you actually see in a lot of cultures where there's an abundance mindset, Maslow's hierarchy of needs doesn't have nearly the same pull. You find people in very poor conditions that are barely surviving, that are deeply fulfilled. And you and I have both been in corporate boardrooms where not a single person in the room is fulfilled. And we tend to, but the problem with that myth is that it tends to enable leadership to classify certain jobs as non-purpose jobs and other jobs as purpose jobs. Or like they just want a job, that's all they care about, right? I hear that all the time about low wage jobs. Like they're just happy to have a job, like that's where they're at. It's completely dehumanizing people. It's also not addressing the fact that a lot of our problems at work come from executives not being fulfilled, and therefore like basically, spreading their pain around because they aren't actually connected to who they are at their core. So that's a major myth is around that piece. I've got more. I'm going to show just one last one because I think it's important. Which is that a lot of people believe it's okay to not have fulfillment and purpose at work and to get that elsewhere. Oh, they get it from family. Oh, they get it from temple. Oh, they get it from their softball league. Whatever that is. And therefore, again, work doesn't have to fill that role. So as a leader, like your job's your job. Like this is not your place to get purpose, to get fulfillment. That's sort of that narrative. What we found in our research was that of people who are fulfilled in life. So Andrew, if you say, I'm fulfilled in life, and you're a working person, only 1% of you said, I'm unfulfilled at work. So if you're fulfilled in life, you're fulfilled at work, because we're one person and it's one mindset. This whole idea of like work doesn't have to be that, you get it elsewhere, that doesn't fundamentally like add up, we found statistically. And I think that's one of the, again, like from a leadership standpoint, these things each are incredibly important, because they have been ways that leadership has let itself off the hook for creating cultures that are effective, because they've said, oh, this isn't a cause, they're not going to get that here, or low paying jobs, that's not important here, or they can get that met elsewhere. Like these are all excuses for creating subhuman, non-human workplaces. So I think from your lens of leadership, I think it's so important to recognize that these myths are actually a big part of what's causing leadership to have the wrong narrative about work.
I want to ask you a wildly open-ended question, like
Please.
what's the answer, or where to start, or something like that. First of all, I appreciate that and I have never in my life been a researcher. I've been a practitioner since day one, even in my first career. But I'm glad to hear that that the statistics have caught up with what I've observed.
It's all
And
intuitive.
well, it is intuitive, and I can certainly learn from reviewing some of that research as well. But absolutely, and it's a bit of a cop out, if you will, right? It's, oh, that's not our area. Engagement and purpose and fulfillment is not really our area. This is work. Um, and I think it's important. I'm grateful that the research is available now, and that and thought leaders like you are sharing it, because it brings some additional people into the conversation. It's interesting. I find that some of the leaders that I coach in my executive coaching work now are now wrestling, for example, with forcing people to come back to the office.
Yeah.
And this notion of, oh, we'll make them come back to the office, and then it'll be worthwhile. And so, well, why will it be worthwhile by osmosis to just have people in the same place? We need to think about deliberately, what is going to be valuable? How do we make this happen? You can't just cop out and say, well, this is the way we've always done it. We force people to come to the office. It has its own reward. No, not necessarily. So it puts pressure on leaders to think in a different way. But as far as I'm concerned, it's very healthy pressure, and it should come with the job. So
Yep. No, I agree. Well, and that really gets to, I think, the things we found that matter, which is sort of getting to your question. I mean, I guess three pieces are sort of how do we think about what someone's purpose is, what actually creates fulfillment, and then there's the mindset piece of it. So starting with the first one, which is really like, how do you help people understand what their purpose is? We found that when people know what their purpose is, when they know what fulfills them, they're more than 50% more likely to actually be fulfilled. So, and not surprisingly, if you drive without a map, you're not likely to get where you're trying to go, right? Because you don't know where you're actually trying to go. You may get there randomly, but much less likely. So it is very helpful for someone to have this self-awareness around like what fulfills them. And I'll give you one of the dimensions, Andrew. It's, we don't have to go through all of them, but one of the things we found in the research was that elevation of impact is a very real thing and makes a big difference. So what we found was that about a third of people gain the most fulfillment when they feel like they can see their work impact individuals. They have that sort of on the ground direct experience and affirmation of their impact, right? So think of a doctor, feeling a sense of impact from like helping a patient, right? So
directly, more directly as opposed to less directly.
correct.
Mhm.
And then you sort of think about the next one, sort of organizational level or team level. So this is the person who might be a hospital administrator, and they're like, why would I want to help patients that way when I can help a whole hospital be effective, and therefore I'm reaching the lives of thousands of people, right? And I'm more that way. I look at like if I had to go see patients individually, like it would drive me nuts. Like I just would not be fulfilling. Like that's not the way I get a sense of meaning. So there's a group of people who really, about a third, who get the most meaning from being team and organization builders and are really about sustained organizational impact. And then the final third are what we call society. And these are folks for whom it's lovely what the doctor does, it's lovely what a hospital does, but they're like, I want to be contributing to fighting cancer. I want to be contributing to inequality in healthcare. And they can be doing that as a doctor, but they want to feel like their work is part of that broader change in society for them to feel fulfilled. Whereas a lot of people at that individual level, like those things are abstract and they don't care that much. For others without that, no matter how many people I help, I don't get that motivated unless I know that I'm helping this broader broader societal change. So as an individual, it's really helpful to know where you are on that elevation. I'm at that society level. The things that get me excited, where I feel like I made a difference, is when I see a change happen at a societal level, and that I can be a part of it. Not as much a little bit in my organization, not much on the individual side for me. So why does that matter to me as a leader? When I give speeches to my team, they're all about the societal change we're making, which is great because it harnesses my passion. But the challenge is for the person on my team who's an individual driver, like they're going to be like, yeah, that was, nice speech. That was cool. But like Bob over here needs help, right? So understanding that there's a diversity of purpose in your team, and that while it's important to channel your passion and your elevation of impact, recognizing that for a lot of people, that's not going to hit the way you think it should. Just because it gives you goosebumps doesn't mean it gives it to other people. And you really need to be able to think about that on your team, there are people at all these levels. And how are you communicating and celebrating and rewarding impact at each level? Because rewarding and celebrating impact at a level that doesn't matter to somebody as much is just not going to have the impact.
Mhm.
The
Right.
follow-
So to be aware of those different levels of motivation, so as to speak to them, so I can be real fully engaged. Because what you're sharing doesn't really light me up. It's not going to be as energizing, the same fuel for me. Great, that makes sense.
It's super hard because when we're so fired up about something, it's just, you assume that everyone else is, right? And to some degree, your energy is contagious, but there's a limit to it, right?
Well, right, and just as we use different in the leadership development business, the way we use different assessments, for example, to just pinpoint what people's motivators are, preferences, et cetera. Always good to be able to articulate them, to your point, to your peers, to your boss, et cetera. But if I'm not aware, I could just be sending the wrong message. I could be driving a message of making money, and for some people that just doesn't resonate at all. Other people are more altruistic, or other people are more affiliative. They want to win together. You got to speak the right language. That makes
Yeah.
okay.
No, and I
Cool.
think this dimension is really powerful because it really gets to what people truly care about from an intrinsic standpoint. So, we've had close to 500,000 people take the assessment to determine purpose, and it's multiple dimensions. I'm sharing one of those with you at the moment. So that's sort of that purpose definition. The second thing was like, what fulfills us? And this has really been the big breakthrough. And it's, to your earlier point, this stuff is super intuitive, but it just hadn't been researched and clarified. So when it comes to fulfillment, there's only three things that really matter: relationships, impact, and growth. We need to feel like we have meaningful relationships. We need to feel like we're making a meaningful impact. And we need to always feel like we're growing. When those three conditions are met, we report that we're fulfilled. If only two are met, you might be fulfilled in the short term, but you won't be it won't be in a sustained way. And I think this is the piece where a lot of leaders don't understand the nature of fulfillment and what's necessary. They tend to over anchor on the impact part,
Mhm.
and they don't recognize that actually, I believe relationships are the foundational piece. And that if people don't have meaningful relationships at work, it doesn't matter how impactful the work is, they'll burn out and be unfulfilled. It's absolutely critical that we build cultures, relationships, which goes to your point about like work from home, which is people want relationships. And I believe those are very hard to do virtually. It's not impossible, but it's very hard. So trying to figure out like how do you use the office as a place to meet that need for folks? And there's great, research on what is needed for a strong relationship. And Shasta Nelson has a great book on this, but it came down to you need positive, consistent, and vulnerable relationships.
Mhm.
Positive in that, whether you start off in a negative place, you always are working together to get to a better place. Consistent, and that it's not like you talk once a month or sporadically. It's like there's a drumbeat to it. And then vulnerable, doesn't mean you have to cry every time you talk. It means you're just being real. And I think those kinds of conversations are something companies need to do a better job of creating space for and cultivating in their culture if you really want to have people fulfilled. And in general, I would say companies do a pretty piss poor job of that for themselves. I think up again to your point about office, people need to feel like they're making an impact. And that doesn't necessarily have to be a big thing. It could just be making someone smile. It could be holding the door for them. It could be just being thoughtful. That is much harder to do virtually. Because there's fewer opportunities to help someone. There's fewer opportunities to observe, like, oh, Andrew's looking a little sad today. I'm gonna go ask him how he's doing, or to say, oh, Andrew, I just saw you got that thing done, or that piece of work you were doing. Like, that's so awesome. Like, that's so much that happens so much more frequently in an in-person environment, I believe, than it does in a virtual one, because you just lose that observational component. And then the third one is growth. We need to feel like we're constantly growing. And as you know, growth is not about reading books. It's about being challenged to push yourself outside your comfort zone and actually become a bigger person. It's when we do things that scare us. And again, I think there's limits to how much that we can do when we're just in a home office all the time. So it again speaks to why I think people are struggling with fulfillment, working from home a lot of the time, and where actually companies can build better strategies is around building relationships, impacting growth into the in-office value proposition that follows.
Mhm. No, it's very interesting, and I'm thinking about where, and perhaps you've written something about the impact on fulfillment of working from home. Um, yeah, it's interesting. Well, it's a hot topic these days. I don't know. We're recording this, so someone listens to it in 5 years, it may be less relevant. We'll see.
Yeah, we'll see.
Um,
I think these problems are pretty consistent. Yeah, for a lot of the work I'm doing, like in Latin America, and I did with Imperative, it was really around helping leaders and individuals optimize their life around those just three simple things: relationships, impact, and growth. We tend to overcomplicate all these systems and measurement, but it really does at the heart come down to those three things that a 5-year-old understands. And when we start to actually take stock of those on a regular basis and take personal ownership of them to create changes on a weekly and monthly basis, I think it's our best bet at being able to actually change the nature of work is by focusing on those three things.
mm. I feel like I need to ask you about the assessment that you spoke of, just in case anyone listening may be curious about it. This is something that used to be kind of publicly available, simple. Now it's something that's a little bit less available, but still available. Am I understanding that correctly? So where could people look for that if they wanted it?
Yeah, I mean, there's a simplified version in the Purpose Economy, the book itself. Um, so that's probably the easiest consumer way to get access to it. If you're looking for it for your team or organization, Imperative at imperative.com is the source for that. So they offer it. It's tied into a peer coaching platform currently, but I think there's plans to also start to look at how to just get access to the assessment.
Mhm. Got it.
Yeah.
And mhm.
No, and it's been
So
amazing how big of a hit that was, just because people, yeah, as you know, like when people have insights about themselves, like there's this incredible sort of rush and clarity that creates. And a lot of people felt like, oh, I can't have purpose, or I'm never going to get it. And they get the result and they're like, oh, this is actually something that's attainable and real. And now I get what this is all about.
And yes, I totally agree. And it's there. It's not something that has to be created. It's something to be the way that I've worked with it over the years has been something to be discovered. We know what has meaning for us.
And cultivate. Yep.
Exactly. So when I speak with my 23-year-old son about this and about working, making some decisions about where he wants to work, et cetera, he gets it. And he's 23.
Yep. Yep. No, I think that's right. Yeah. And the final thing I was just going to share with you on this thread, Andrew, is the biggest variable we found was actually mindset. And that we really discovered there's this difference between what we call a purpose mindset and a transactional mindset. And a purpose mindset is basically the belief that work and life can be fulfilling if you make it so. If you think about like a growth mindset, which is a belief that like I can learn anything if I work hard at it. Purpose mindset is anything can be fulfilling if I actually make it so. It's that belief and understanding that we manufacture fulfillment for ourselves. Transactional mindset is everything's a transaction, and there's no fundamental meaning behind anything. It's all this sort of game, or it's about winning or losing, or about gaining or gaining. And what we found is that 2/3 of the population has a transactional mindset, and then they're wildly unfulfilled. And the problem is their mindset. You could put them in the most quote unquote fulfilling environment. They're not going to be fulfilled because they don't fundamentally believe that that's the way the world works.
Even if they're around one-legged kittens, they would still feel that way?
Maybe no-legged kittens, but one-legged, yes.
Fair enough. Yeah, that's very interesting. Yeah. And
And it speaks to, I think, our educational system, which is part of where I was looking at last year, is like we're actually producing more and more transactionally oriented adults through our educational system. We've focused less and less on teaching people how to find fulfillment and more around competing, grades, tests, etc. And that's and creating a workforce that then also is not a moral workforce. It's not a compassionate workforce. And we try to change it around the edges without realizing if you don't change the mindset, like, you can't really change the system.
Yeah, I hear the way I hear you defining these two, which is I love this simple model. It's so helpful. It's really an orientation. It sounds like, right? It's an orientation. It's a little bit like theory X, theory Y from
Yeah.
traditional management theory. How do we see employees? How do we
Yep.
see interactions?
Yep. Yep.
Mm.
And therefore, what do we do? Right. And I think it ties to the fact, which, and well, meaning is something we create as human beings. There's nothing inherently meaningful. Like, we live in this vast universe and galaxy, and like, nothing really has any meaning unless we as human beings manufacture that meaning. And we manufacture meaning through reflection. And that's how we actually then deposit meaning into our bank, if you will. And what's interesting is that transactional mindset people, because they don't see the world that way, they don't reflect that way, therefore they don't create meaning, and therefore they don't deposit in their bank. So if you're transactional and I'm purpose doing the exact same task, I'm going to find meaning in something because I do the reflection work. And if you do reflection work, it's going to be reflecting that it doesn't have meaning, and that's going to become a self-fulfilling reality.
Hmm. So it's interesting because I would think, and tell me if I'm off course here, but I would think that just by reflecting, we're more likely to veer towards something purposeful, and to see purpose in something, or to see something bigger in something. That I think reflection breeds purpose, or breeds meaning and connection, but not necessarily. If you could reflect through a transactional mindset, and it'll take you even further into that place.
That's right. Well, it's confirmation bias, right? So when we reflect, we tend to confirm what we think. So if you confirm this is meaningful, guess what? It's meaningful. If you confirm nothing has meaning, nothing has meaning. I think you also find with transactional folks that they tend to be more fear-driven. So reflection, if not done the right way, can actually just amplify fear. So reflection is always, it's a good thing, but the mindset and the way questions are asked really has a big impact on what actually ends up getting processed.
So this leads me. I mean, I'm in the leadership development business.
Yes.
What can leaders at all levels do? I don't believe leadership is a position. What can leaders at all levels do to help promote more of a purpose mindset? What can we do? I mean, in the book, I know you had I'm not going to try to refer you to a specific page, but in the book, you talked about new work rules and what leaders can do. So given, okay, there's limits to the educational system. We're not going to fix that in the workplace. I'm a big believer in creating micro cultures on teams at work. So what can a leader do to invite someone who may be more transactionally focused into the world of purpose? And is it even possible?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's my theory on it is that there's some people who have a purpose mindset, some that are like on the fence and could go either way, and some that are entrenched transactional that are very hard to change. So, I think for a leader, my advice at a practical level is, first of all, know who you're hiring and who you're bringing onto your team. If you bring a transactional person onto your team, don't expect them to change. Like, that's my grandma always said, you can't change people. So just I think being very careful about who you're bringing onto your team is really important. The second thing is to really build in reflection on relationships impacting growth into your weekly process. So, for example, the company that the co-owner and down in Latin America, what they do is every week they do a peer coaching session where two employees are matched together, and they're matched together for a full quarter. And once a week, they reflect on their relationships impacting growth and make goals for the following week about their relationships impacting growth. So that they're actually processing their goals and their reflection through those three things that are intrinsically motivating. And then every quarter you swap partners, so you're getting to know other people in the organization. So that's,
And
yeah.
I'm sorry to interrupt it. And is that something that, does that need a lot of definition? Is that something, and do you find that just by teeing it up and saying, hey, we're going to focus on X, do people tend to find a conversation around that, or do you need to provide a lot of guidance?
I mean, we just give them three questions, really, which is, I mean, it's shorthand. Anybody could like rewrite these in their own version, which is just like, how are your relationships over the last week? Did you, like, to what degree do you feel like you made an impact this week? Like, what degree did you think you grew? And sort of talk through that. And then it's like, what do you want to proactively do with relationships this week? Proactively impact, proactively growth. You can word those in 600 different ways, but that's the like soul or the heart of that, right? And just that process starts to rewire us to think about work that way, which is super powerful. And then just being careful about as a leader, when are you actually providing a transactional frame for work? And just starting to be aware of like what you're actually doing, which is not to say work often is a transaction. There's transactions happening, but in terms of how you're processing it and how you're focusing the culture, making that shift.
Yeah, it's interesting. I remember years ago working with a model, an organizational model, and a leadership model that riffed off of Ken Wilber
Sure.
through the I, the we, and the it, the personal, the interpersonal, and the impersonal. In a way, the impact is it can be the impersonal, the relationships, the interpersonal, and the growth is personal. Uh,
That's
a little
love.
bit slightly different take on it, but I appreciate how a simple conversation like this, and this is why I'm asking, just from a practical level, we don't need to formulate some detailed thing. Let's just make this part of our dialogue. This is just how we do business. We talk about these things.
Yeah, we talk about it and we do it on a drum beat. I think high performing organizations do these on a drum beat. They don't do them ad hoc. And I think it's building that in and keeping it simple. Like I think what I like about relationships impacting growth, again, is like a kindergarten student would get that at a base level. I think all these other concepts they're too, even the one you just shared, it's like you have to think about, okay, what does that mean? Like
Yep. Yep.
it should just be like in the simplest of language and real. Um, and then you really start to see what matters.
Right. And I'm going to put a word into the conversation here, and I'm not sure how you react to it. And that word is spiritual or spirituality. Um, do you find a connection? And this is a totally subjective thing. I asked 50 people this question, and I get 50 different answers. Do you find that there's a spiritual dimension to purpose? And if so, what is it?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I'm starting to think about it in like a bunch of different lanes or different paths. But I think at one level, there's this belief fundamentally that like we are a collective, and that as a collective, like there's a need to serve each other,
Mhm.
need to be human and be of service, and that service is how we need to show up in the world. And I think there's a spiritual dimension to that.
Mhm, mhm. Well, I think that connects back to what you said earlier about historically all the religions would have a component of this. I think that we're getting to the same place here. Cool.
Yeah, yeah, no, that's right. And I think it's also transactional mindset. I think is often tied to fear, and it's this sense of like there's nothing greater. Therefore, all there is the transaction in front of us.
Mhm,
And it's easy with the rational mind to get to that conclusion, but I don't think it actually ends up serving anybody very well in the long term.
mhm. Yeah, that makes sense.
So
Yeah.
yeah, um, yeah,
Yeah, thank you for that. And I know that for me, when I talk with people in this podcast and outside the podcast, and they say, "How do you define what's spiritual?" I say, "I don't." Honestly, not to be evasive, but because it can mean different things at different times. It can be very alienating. I tend to talk about spiritual dimensions of us as people, and how do we bring those dimensions to the workplace, and with what benefit, and then how can leaders invite that in a very productive, safe, non-alienating way. What questions, given that we just have a few minutes left here in our time,
yeah.
what questions haven't I asked you that you think I need to in order to round out some of what we're talking about?
No, I mean, there's a lot of detailed things, but I think we've really hit on the main themes. I think it's really around understanding what purpose is and isn't. It's reinforcing this idea of sort of what actually defines purpose for somebody, the sources of meaning, relationships impacting growth, and really understanding purpose mindset versus transactional mindset. I think those are the key things I would want people to think about. And then to your last couple of questions, like how do you start to operationalize that? Uh, and I guess I would just say like, leadership starts with you. So if you haven't done the work around your personal sense of what brings meaning to you, if you haven't done work around really assessing relationships impacting growth in your work and in your life, um, if you haven't really thought about what your default mindset is, doing that in work yourself is a great way to start. I
Mm,
know that's a lot of what you do with your
mhm. Yeah. Well, you can't embody what you don't have, or what you
yeah,
haven't thought about and processed and metabolized. Yeah. I know that people, if they want more, can go to purposeeconomy.com. And there's a wonderful section on the website called The Purposeful CEO that talks about some research that the your group has done with Fast Company, et cetera, just leadership models, what that could look like. Again, it's not my intention to funnel anybody to a particular way of thinking,
yeah.
but there's some good thought-provoking material there for sure. What else would be good resources for those wanting to learn more about what we're talking about?
Well, definitely would love to connect with people on LinkedIn. I do a lot of my interaction with the world through LinkedIn. So sort of welcome people to come connect with me there. But honestly, like, I don't think it's about resources. I think it's about yourself, and just,
Mm.
I would encourage people to stop trying to learn and spend more time trying to be, and actually just reflecting on, really just start by just reflecting on your relationships impact and growth right now. Like, score it on a 1 to 10. Like, how well are you performing or showing up in each of those dimensions, and what can you do to start to make a change there? I tend to find I've increasingly found, like, I don't really have an appetite to read a lot more books or research. I feel like the older I get, the more I realize the truth's all within. It's about just shutting up and listening and doing the reflection work, which is not easy to do because I'm find ways to avoid it by being busy. But the most important book, I still think, is just yourself, and we rarely read ourselves.
Beautiful. I want to leave it at that. That's lovely. Thank you for landing that as gracefully and clearly as you did. Thanks for your time, Aaron. And please, if you're listening to this and you're activated by this, keep looking, but not necessarily reading books. Thank you so much, Aaron. I appreciate your time and your wisdom.
Yeah, my pleasure. It's a lot of fun.
Thank you for listening to Spirituality in Leadership. If you want to access this wealth of knowledge and insight on a regular basis, please subscribe to the show. Join the network of leaders who want to do and be better. You can go to the site spiritualityinleadership.com or your preferred podcast platform to catch all the episodes and learn more. Until next time, take good care of yourself.